Hi everyone, this is Joyce Yip Green, and this I will be presenting my research spotlight assignment on the psychological theories to change attitudes and behaviors. So the objectives of this presentation is to describe the key psychological theories relevant to changing attitudes and behaviors for improved health outcomes. I'll be highlighting some case studies based on the Lit Review that I've done related to marketing campaigns in diverse communities and developing countries. I'll be focusing on three specific theories, and those key psychological theories include empowerment theory, diffusion of innovations, and communication persuasion. There are many more psychological theories that inform campaigns, but these were the three that I wanted to highlight as I felt like there's a lot of relevance to the work that, or the case that I would be presenting related to reducing child marriage in Nigeria. So let's start with empowerment theory. Empowerment is a construct that links individual strengths and competencies, natural helping systems, and proactive behaviors to social policy and social change. And empowerment is really it's been used in a lot of community organizing and community change projects. The basic tenets of empowerment theory is a focus on wellness, competence, strength, capabilities, and environmental influences, and de-emphasizing illness, deficits, weakness, risk factors, and blaming of victims. So this is a very strength-based perspective, and the theory is really that each individual has strengths and human resources that can be applied to activate change. And so there is less of an emphasis on what is not working, but an emphasis on how to change using the resources within the community. So this figure highlights the Youth Empowerment Strategies intervention model, or the YES intervention model. This is a project in California that applied empowerment theory to a community organizing and community building effort. This project engaged pre-adolescent youth in problem-solving issues in their community. So part of the process involved participation in social action groups that were developed, as well as evaluative approaches to identify and bring awareness to issues in the target population's community. So they used photo voice, dialogue, reflection, action, and other participatory action research approaches. What resulted were the development of social action projects, including awareness campaigns about the conditions in the schools, school behavior campaigns that included skits about good and bad ways to get attention, as well as projects to improve school spirit. School spirit t-shirts were developed, and the result of this project was that youth felt empowered to act and make a difference in their community. So as you can also see from the chart here, is that there's a focus on future orientation, on influence, and awareness of risky behaviors and health promoting behaviors, as well as ways to reduce violence, depression, and other antisocial behaviors. So the way that they applied these empowerment principles were in collaborative decision making, conflict resolution skills, and increased involvement in designing and implementing positive project efforts. So this is really a bottom-up approach. So in thinking about this empowerment theory and how it would apply to the campaign for girl education in Nigeria, really the efforts in Nigeria is to focus on girl education as the product in order to reduce the prevalence and incidences of child marriage. So one way to apply this empowerment theory is to develop social action groups to identify potential barriers to education retention for the girls. We could also identify ways to advocate and help to influence policies related to the reduction of child marriage. Some of that is already in place, but we could work to apply that on the ground on a local level. And then we could involve the community stakeholders in the development of the social marketing campaign. So really, this is really to empower the members of the society in identifying what works, what doesn't work, and what they need in order to affect change related to reducing child marriage. The next theory I want to focus on is diffusion of innovation. This is actually one of my personal favorites. The diffusion of innovation was developed by E.M. Rogers in 1962, and this is a theory that talks about how over time an idea or product gains momentum and spreads through a specific population or social system. And so the key to adoption is that the person must perceive the idea, behavior, or product as new or innovative. And so once that idea is introduced, then there's an assessment of the types of adopters, right? So there might be the early adopters, there's the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And so really, in terms of the diffusion of innovation, often it starts with the early adopters, and then it takes a while for the prospectors to come on board with the idea or adoption of the product. And then eventually, when this diffusion happens, you'll see this spectrum here. Okay, so Sundstrom provides a framework for integrating diffusion of innovation with social marketing. I love this figure. This framework combines Rogers' diffusion of innovations theory with French and Blair Stevens' core components of social marketing. It's a synthesis of social change that moves away from just targeting individual change, but really integrating individual, community, and structural approaches. So as you see from this figure here, it's focusing on what is this innovation, the highest priority health issue, and understanding the audience according to the adopter categories. So understanding the types of adopters, whether they're innovators or late adopters or laggards, really being strategic about the target audience. And then identifying the behavior and tapping into the social system, getting the opinion of the leaders as information seekers, and getting that information from the bottom up. And then finally, the identifying the communication channels. And you'll see a little bit more about communication channels in the next theory that I'll be presenting. But I really like this diffusion of innovation in social marketing. So again, I wanted to highlight that this process adopts the participatory approach, which we've also seen in the previous theory that I mentioned, right, with empowerment, where the groups identify the priority issues and the social structures that impede or enhance solutions. Caldwell and Klepp described targeting the early adopters. So as we mentioned in the diffusions of innovation theory, this particular approach used the early adopters and targeted them in HIV/AIDS public health innovation in Botswana. And the goal was to reduce stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS and encourage HIV testing, as well as taking positive steps to address HIV status, whether individuals were testing positive or whether or not individuals even were aware of their status. So some of the strategies included establishing local support groups for people living with HIV/AIDS, or these are PLWHA, people living with HIV/AIDS. And then one thing that I thought was pretty innovative was this Mr. Positive Living contest. So they would have an annual contest to vote for this Mr. Positive Living. And these are individuals that have been tested positive for HIV, but had taken steps. So targeting these early adopters who have gone through these local support groups and have really bought into this idea that living with HIV/AIDS is not something to be ashamed of, but that they can be empowered to take charge and take action of their health. So by doing this and investing in those early adopters, they encourage social entrepreneurship and then developed advocates for this model as then new support groups were being developed throughout the region. How we can apply diffusion of innovation in supporting girl education in Nigeria is that we could have girl education groups to provide support for girls who are really committed to focusing on their education and identifying long-term goals. And not only, and I mentioned here a support group for girls, but maybe support groups for the parents and family members of those girls, and identifying ways that they can continue to support that commitment to educating girls in the village or the region that they live in. And then to identify those champions and highlight the individual stories or cases of the benefits of education versus early marriage. So focusing on the early adopters of this change theory. Okay, the third theory I wanted to focus on was communication persuasion, and this is also it's another way of saying the input-output model by McGuire, and this identifies 5 variables to communication persuasion strategies in campaigns. And this input-output model is looking at the 5 inputs. So when you're thinking about crafting persuasive messages or a persuasion campaign, we need to consider the source. And that source should have some sort of perceived expertise, trustworthiness, even audience similarity, as we've seen through research that audience similarity seems to increase impact. Then in the message, we need to consider the structure of the argument, the types of arguments in appeal. We need to think about the organization of the message, the style, the repetition of the message, and then channel. Thinking about modality, the directness, how are we giving this message out to the target? And that could be use of media, television, or some other context. And then we need to pay attention to the receiver. What's the demographic that we're targeting? What is their ability or their personality that impacts their ability to receive that message? And then finally, the destination. We need to think about the immediacy of the message or the delay of the message, and whether or not it'll be a direct message or a prevention or cessation. And then the outputs, McGuire identifies 12 outputs, and these outputs range from starting from initial exposure to the step 12 is to act on it and proselytizing to others. So once an individual receives the message, they tune into it, they like it, they learn about it, and then they begin to change their attitudes about it. And then this new product or new idea gets positioned into their memory, and then they're able to decide to act on it, and then begin to tell others about this. And that's how this persuasive messaging idea is enacted. So one way to apply this communication persuasion model is through the use of broadcast media campaigns. Ezogo and Chukwuemeka did a study on the effectiveness of social media campaigns in Nigeria. and have found that broadcast media, specifically radio and television, has had a positive impact on social life changes, largely through communication by peers and family members of those media campaigns. So this really illustrates the importance of the inputs identified by McGuire. Um, and if we think about this persuasion model and how persuasive this message is, and how we need to really consider the structure of the argument, the types of messages, and then really in thinking about our receiver, which is really also in line with the diffusion of innovations theory. So I'm seeing all these three theories coming together and working together um, in impacting social change by empowering communities, empowering individuals, and focusing on this communication persuasion model in honing in on the types of messages that we're using, as well as the target audience. So there are many paths to an effective campaign, but I think it's important to think about the types of strategies and psychological theories of how people receive messages, how people adopt change, and some of their behaviors when hearing messages in order to be effective in whatever campaign that we develop. Thank you so much for your time and consideration, and I look forward to your comments and feedback. Thank you.